Hey guys, today I'm reading Yankee Doodle Gals. Yankee Doodle Gals, Women Pilots of World War II, and I'm reading part 5. Wasps at last. Both Nancy's and Jackie's programs were up and running by the end of 1942. The next year, in the summer of 1943, these two programs were combined into one group with a snazzier name, WASPs, Women Air Force Service Pilots. WASPs not only delivered planes, but flew many other kinds of non-combat missions. Jackie, now in her mid-30s, was the head of the whole WASP program. Nancy, age 29, was in charge of all WASPs who would ferry planes. Jackie and Nancy didn't always agree, but they tried to stay out of each other's way. Their offices were in different cities. They never saw much of each other, notes Barbara Erickson London. Nancy ran her part of the program, the plane delivery service, pretty much on her own. She didn't like being in an office and delivered many planes herself. Jackie, on the other hand, seemed to like the deal-making that goes with running a large organization. She was forceful and focused on not everybody liked her, observes B.J. Williams. But you can't always win a popularity contest and be effective. If it weren't for Jackie, the WASP program would not have been as big as it was. She welcomed into the WASPs hundreds of women who had flown only a little before the war. She wanted to run a real woman's air corps. Jackie adored her tea-straws. For this concept that she believed in, that woman could do this. She probably was the only person that could have done it as effectively. Rough skies. However, there was a cloud on the horizon, all because of one little word. Pilot was left out of law Congress passed in 1942. This law created a new women's unit for the Army and listed all the jobs women in this unit could do. Pilot was on the list. So legally, women pilots could not be part of the Army's new women's group. Changing the law could take months. Army officials didn't want to wait. Neither did Jackie or Nancy. To get around the law, it was decided that women pilots would work for the Army without officially being in the Army. That meant the women pilots couldn't have military titles or wear Army uniforms. They weren't covered by Army insurance and were paid less than male pilots, who did the same kind of flying. Jackie and Nancy decided to accept SS or sense or sense to accept this less than perfect arrangement. The war was going badly. Jackie and Nancy felt a big responsibility to have women pilots on the job as soon as possible, so they could help with the war and also prove their worth. Ready to sign up. A telegram arrived in September 1942 at the Texas home of Florine Miller Watson. The telegram came from the Army Air Forces. It invited Florine to join Nancy Love's new squadron, which would deliver planes for the Army. Florine had been flying for 2 years and was teaching young men to be military pilots. She happily gave up that job to fly military planes herself. Nancy's experts. Florine wasn't at home when her telegram arrived. She was on vacation in Florida and learned of the telegram when she spoke by phone with her mom. To join the squadron, Florine had to travel right away to the squadron's headquarters at an Army air base in Wilmington, Delaware. I had only my vacation clothes, Florine recalls. I didn't care. I took a train to Delaware. Women in World War II were gutsy. And when an opportunity came, you got out there and did it. Only about 80 women were invited to join the squadron, just those who had a lot of flying experience. A few others read about the squadron in newspapers and asked to join. Altogether, 28 women made their way to Delaware to become part of this exciting new adventure. They had to have flown for at least 500 hours, more than twice as much as was needed for men who did the same job, deliver planes. The women also had to be at least 21 years old and high school graduates. Men, however, could be as young as 19 and didn't have to have graduated from high school. Many of Nancy's pilots had much more than the required 500 hours of flying time. Teresa James, the former barnstormer, was one of the first to sign up. She had flown more than 2,000 hours. The average for the group was about 1,000 hours. That's a lot of flying, almost as much as the 1,500 hours an airplane pilot needs today. Nancy wanted only experts. Did I read? No. That's good. Betty Gillies, flying mom. As a mom with two young kids, Betty Gillies had a lot of responsibilities to juggle. She had been flying since her teens and was one of the best ferry pilots in Nancy's squadron. Betty was stationed at a base in Delaware, but often spent several days at a time staying at the aircraft factory in New York where the planes she delivered were made. This factory was near her home. Every few weeks, she was able to see her kids and husband. A pilot who was an executive with an aircraft company. A nanny took care of her son Pete and her daughter Pat while Betty was away. I was about 10 when Mom went into the Wasp. Remembers Pete and her daughter Pat. While Betty was away, I was about 10 when Mom went into the Wasp. Remembers Pete, who became a helicopter pilot. Oh, that's like I thought Pete was the son, which he was. I just read that in it. But yeah, helicopter pilot when he grew up. I was very proud of Mom and of what she was doing. My friends thought I was the luckiest guy in the world to have a mom and dad who flew airplanes and military airplanes at that. He remembers a day his mother took him out to the aircraft factory. She was scheduled to fly a new P-47 fighter from the factory to some place far away, but the four machine guns had to be test fired before she could start on the flight. Pete got to fire the guns. The crew chief helped Pete into the pilot's seat, keeping the cockpit roof open. I was barely able to see over the edge of the cockpit. Pete recalls the crew chief was standing on the wing, leaning into the cockpit to tell me what to do. When he gave the order to fire, all I had to do was press a particular button. I thought the world had come to an end. The noise was unbelievable. That had to be the biggest thrill in my 10 years of life. What a great day that was. After these expert pilots arrived at the base in Delaware, they had to pass the Army's physical exam to be sure they were strong and healthy. They also had to take flying tests to prove they could handle Army planes. Next, they spent a few weeks learning about Army rules and aircraft. Then they got right to work delivering the planes. At first, these women were called WAFs, Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron. A year later, when Nancy's squadron joined with Jackie Cochran's training program, Nancy's pilots became known as WASPs. Like Florine, most women in Nancy's first squadron had been working as flight instructors. They could have earned more money if they kept on teaching, but the idea of flying powerful Army planes was hard to resist. I'd have flown those planes for free, explains Barbara Erickson at age 20. Erickson, London. At age 22, Barbara was one of Nancy's youngest pilots. The oldest were in their mid-30s. Some were single, others were married, often with husbands in the armed forces. Teresa married just before signing up, but sadly her husband died late in the war when his B-17 bomber was shot down over France. Jackie's trainees. Soon after telegrams for Nancy's squadron went out, Jackie Cochran sent out her own telegrams. She invited other women pilots to sign up for her new training program. To sign up for her new training program. Although this woman knew how to fly, Jackie's program would help prepare them to fly military planes. Some women like Jean Schaffer Fitzpatrick didn't receive telegrams but learned of Jackie's program from magazine articles. I didn't know about it until I saw an article in Life magazine. I thought, oh, doggone, this is the way to go. Unlike the very experienced pilots in Nancy's squadron, Jean and most of the other women who applied to join Jackie's program hadn't been earning a living from flying. They had been doing other jobs or were college students. However, a few had aviation jobs. Loie Hollingsworth Ziller had graduated from Purdue University with a degree in aeronautical engineering and had a terrific job designing airplane engines. But when she heard about Jackie's program, she gave up what job to sign up with Jackie. Military planes, in Jackie's fame, were hard to resist. Jean Schaffer Fitzpatrick. When 23-year-old Jean Schaffer Fitzpatrick applied to join the WASPs in 1943, she feared she might not be accepted because she was too skinny. A WASP had to weigh at least 120 pounds. Right before she drove out to an Army base to have her medical exam, Jean and her mom went to a fancy restaurant in San Francisco and had a huge 7-course lunch. Then during the drive to the Army base outside of town, Jean slurped down a bottle of milk and munched a bunch of bananas. That afternoon, as she stood on the Army's doctor scale, the marker just barely reached the 120-pound mark. "You just got in under the wire," said the doctor. "Oh, I was on a diet," answered Jean. Getting in. More than 25,000 women applied to join Jackie's training program. However, the requirements for being accepted were tough. Much harder than for the pilot training program. The Army had 4 men. Women had to be pilots already to be accepted into Jackie's program, but men who had never flown at all could enter the training programs for male cadets. At first, Jackie's trainees had to have flown at least 200 hours and be 21 years old. During 1943, the Army lightened up on the requirements. By the end of that year, women could sign up who were as young as 18 and who had flown only 35 hours. The number needed for a beginner's license. Before being accepted, women had to be interviewed by Jackie or one of her assistants. I guess they wanted to make sure we didn't have to heads or something, explained Jean. I was nervous at my interview. There were about 8 other girls in the room with me. Each had to show her pilot's license and log book to prove she had flown the right number of hours. The logbook was like a diary, explains Nani Horton Anderson. When a pilot soloed, she wrote time in her logbook, and her instructor signed it. Pilots do the same today. That's what I'm going to end for right now. Bye.